He was bruised, limping, and alone left to fade beneath the ruins of an abandoned gas station. No one looked twice. No one cared. But then, a 6-year-old boy stopped. In the middle of Dustwell's burning winds and silence, something passed between them. Something fierce, something real. What came next shook the town to its core, because this wasn't just a stray dog. This was a forgotten soldier. If you believe in redemption, in loyalty stronger than fear, then stay. Subscribe, and witness the story that no one saw coming. The town of Dustwell, New Mexico, sat like a forgotten speck on the edge of the desert. Its few sun-worn buildings nestled between parched hills and a snaking railroad that hadn't seen a passenger train in 20 years. The summer sun bore down relentlessly, casting long, shivering mirages across the cracked asphalt streets. The wind carried dry grit like whispers of old secrets, and the scent of rust and hot metal clung to everything. A heat wave had swept across the region for weeks, and even the cacti seemed tired. The sky above was cloudless, a pale blue canvas untouched by mercy. Noah Patterson, 6 years old, was a boy with a mop of sun-bleached brown hair, freckles scattered across his nose like desert dust, and a quiet resilience in his eyes that didn't quite match his age. He was small for his age, thin, with a thoughtful, observant demeanor. While most children his age ran wild or clung to video games, Noah liked to watch how people moved, how the wind stirred trash in the corners of alleys, how birds hopped across dry fence rails. Perhaps it was because he spent most of his time alone, or perhaps it was because of his mother. Lizzie Patterson, Noah's mother, was a tall, lean woman with grease-stained hands, short copper-red hair usually tucked beneath a faded ball cap, and crow's feet deepened not by laughter, but by long days and longer nights. She ran a small auto repair shop on the edge of town, Patterson's Fix-It, and had done so single-handedly since Noah's father disappeared 5 years earlier. He hadn't died, just left one morning and never came back, which in some ways was worse. The betrayal had hardened Lizzie in ways she didn't talk about. She wasn't unkind, but she wore emotional armor, practical, unsentimental, always prepared for the worst. With customers, she was brisk but honest. With Noah, she was protective to the point of quiet suffocation, always reminding him not to wander, not to talk to strangers, not to trust too much. That morning, the sky shimmered with heat by 9 a.m., and Lizzie's old truck wheezed down the dusty road toward the repair shop, kicking up a trail of ochre sand in its wake. Noah sat in the passenger seat, holding a juice box, his legs swinging just above the floor. Most days during summer, he came with her, reading picture books in the back of the garage, sorting bolts, or sketching in an old notepad. But today, something tugged at him. "Can I go look at the old gas station?" he asked as they pulled up to the shop. "Just for a little bit?" Lizzie paused, her eyes squinting at him beneath her cap. "You know the rules, Noah. Don't go too far. Stay where I can see the road." He nodded, hopping out before she could change her mind. The old gas station sat just beyond the tracks, leaning like a forgotten relic of a time when Dustwell was a real town with travelers, not just tumbleweeds and truckers. Its canopy still bore a sun-faded Texaco logo, barely legible beneath layers of wind-blown grime. The pumps had long been gutted, windows shattered, walls spray-painted with initials and dusty slogans. Noah moved quietly, carefully, the way only children who spend much time alone do. He liked this place, the silence of it, the mystery. He was climbing onto a cracked concrete ledge when he saw it, or rather, him. Curled beneath the rusted steel awning, in the shadow just past the second pump, lay a dog, a large one. Noah froze. The dog was a German shepherd, though his fur was so matted and dust-caked that its usual noble black and tan pattern was barely visible. His ribs showed faintly beneath his frame, and his left hind leg was tucked awkwardly, as if injured. One of his ears drooped unnaturally, and there were faint pink scars along his side. But what struck Noah more than the injuries was the way the dog's eyes watched him, cautious, not aggressive, but ancient in their weariness. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply stared. Noah stared back, heart thudding. The moment hung, and then slowly the dog lowered his head onto his front paws, as if to say, "I'm too tired to run. I won't hurt you." Noah glanced back toward the road, half expecting his mother to call him. She hadn't. He stepped forward. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. The dog twitched but didn't move. Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out half a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in wax paper. It had been meant for later, but this felt more important. He peeled back the wrapper and laid it gently on the ground a few feet away. The dog didn't move, not immediately. But when Noah stepped back, the shepherd lifted his head again, sniffed the air, then slowly, cautiously, pulled himself forward. Every movement was deliberate and pained. He limped, dragging his back leg slightly, but his eyes stayed locked on Noah. With a tentative stretch of his neck, he took the sandwich in his mouth and ate it silently. "You're hurt," Noah murmured. "And you look sad." The dog licked his lips, then lowered his head again. Noah sat down cross-legged on the warm concrete, just far enough not to spook him. "You need a name," he said thoughtfully. "I can't call you Dog." He studied the animal for a moment. The way he barely moved, the way his fur fluttered slightly with each shallow breath, the way his eyes flicked toward the tracks every time a distant train horn sounded from miles away. "Ranger," Noah decided. "Yeah, you look like a ranger, someone who used to do important things." The name hung in the hot air like a vow. Ranger didn't react, but Noah thought, just for a second, that the dog's tail gave the faintest twitch. For the next hour, Noah sat near Ranger and talked in the soft, endless way of children about lizards he saw yesterday, about the missing wrench at the shop, about how the heat made the air look wiggly. Ranger didn't move much, but his breathing slowed and his eyes never left the boy. Eventually, Noah heard the distant shout of his mother. He stood up, brushing sand from his shorts. "I'll come back," he said. Ranger didn't follow. He didn't need to. Somewhere between the sandwich and the name, something had passed between them. The next morning, the sky over Dustwell glared down like an open oven. It was only 7:30 a.m., but the air was already dry and pulsing with heat. A few early cicadas chirped from the brush, and somewhere in the distance, a freight train groaned its slow complaint down the rusted track. At Patterson's Fix-It, Lizzie was already at work, her denim overalls spotted with oil, bent over the hood of an old Ford pickup. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, but her mind was elsewhere, specifically on her son. Noah had been unusually quiet the night before, and she had caught him rinsing out his water bottle twice without drinking from it. She didn't have time to question him this morning. She was short-staffed again. Reggie, the part-time teen she occasionally hired, had called in sick. Customers would start trickling in before long, each with stories of cracked engines and overheated carburetors. Still, something in her gut twisted uneasily. Noah, meanwhile, had already slipped away, a folded paper bag clutched tightly in his hand. Inside, it was half a sandwich, a bottle of water, and 2 dog biscuits he'd stolen from an open bag in the back room of Dustwell General Store. He'd paid for a lollipop and tucked the biscuits into his shorts when no one was looking. It wasn't the kind of thing he usually did, but then again, he'd never had a friend like Ranger before. When he reached the tram Zhang, the sun had crept up just enough to cast angled light beneath the awning. Ranger was still there, in almost the exact same spot, lying with his head on his paws, his tail flicking once when he saw Noah approach. The dog looked a little more alert this time. His ears perked slightly and he even shifted his weight onto his front legs. A faint, almost imperceptible whine escaped his throat. "Morning, Ranger," Noah whispered, kneeling a few feet away. "I brought breakfast." He laid the sandwich and biscuits down gently, then unscrewed the cap on the water bottle and placed it beside them. Ranger sniffed cautiously, then began eating, more quickly this time. Noah watched him with quiet wonder. The dog was still dirty, ribs visible beneath his coat, and the old wound on his ear had crusted over again. But there was something steady in his eyes now, an intelligence that watched, processed, remembered. When a distant train whistle blew, however, that calm broke. Ranger's ears flattened, and he shrank into himself, trembling slightly. His gaze snapped to the horizon, toward the tracks, as if waiting for something or someone. Noah frowned. "Do you not like the trains?" he asked softly. "Or are you waiting for somebody to come back?" The dog didn't answer, of course, but the question hung between them like a thread in the wind. That afternoon, Lizzie had a visitor. She was hunched over the same truck when the crunch of boots on gravel made her look up. A man stood at the edge of the garage bay, watching her with calm, unreadable eyes. He was in his late 40s, tall and angular, wearing a gray short-sleeved shirt tucked into dark jeans and a wide-brimmed canvas hat pulled low over thinning brown hair. His boots were military style but scuffed, and a leather messenger bag hung diagonally across his torso. "You Lizzie Patterson?" he asked, his voice low and even. She wiped her hands on a rag, narrowing her eyes. "Depends on who's asking." "Name's Cole. Just passing through," he said. "But I heard you run the only honest shop in this town." "Then you've been lied to," she muttered, but nodded toward the shaded bench. "You need a vehicle looked at?" "No," he said, shifting slightly. "Actually, I've been asking around about dogs. Seen any strays around lately, especially a German Shepherd?" Lizzie's expression stiffened. "Why?" Cole gave a half shrug. "Personal reasons. I used to work with dogs military. Some of them disappear when they get retired or discarded. Happens more than folks realize. I'm looking for one in particular." "Sorry," she said curtly. "Haven't seen any." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Appreciate your time." As he turned to leave, Lizzie called after him. "That shepherd, what's his name?" Cole paused. "He was registered as Ranger. Dark saddle, left ear's got a tear, highly trained, last seen 18 months ago." Lizzie's heart skipped. Her eyes narrowed instinctively, but she didn't let it show. "Well," she said evenly, "if I see any dogs like that, I'll let you know." Cole offered a quiet nod and walked off toward the general store, the sun outlining his thin frame like a shadow drawn in dust. Later that evening, the town grew still beneath a deep orange sky. Dustwell at night felt like a hollow shell. Only a few porch lights glimmered, and most folks stayed in, avoiding the chill wind that followed the scorching heat of the day. Lizzie sat at the kitchen table, a cup of instant coffee in her hand, replaying her conversation with the stranger. Ranger, left ear torn, highly trained. She glanced at Noah, who sat cross-legged on the living room floor, pretending to color but clearly distracted. "You went back there, didn't you?" she said quietly. Noah looked up, startled. Lizzie didn't raise her voice. "To the old station, I can tell." Noah hesitated, then nodded. "He's still there, Mom. His name is Ranger. He's not mean. He's just waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For someone who never came back." Lizzie stared at her son for a long moment, then sipped her coffee. "Eat your dinner," she said, standing up. "I'm driving out there tomorrow. I want to see this dog." The sun was still rising when Lizzie pulled her truck off the main road and rolled onto the broken gravel stretch near the abandoned gas station. Dust trailed behind her in a slow cloud, curling in the rearview mirror like ghosts reluctant to disappear. She parked beneath the rusted canopy, killed the engine, and sat for a moment, her fingers still gripping the steering wheel. The morning air was dry, but not yet brutal, laced with the scent of hot metal, creosote bush, and old rubber. Noah sat beside her, his knees pulled to his chest, staring silently out the window. He hadn't said much during the drive, only whispering, "He's always here in the mornings," when she asked if Ranger might have wandered off. Lizzie took a deep breath, stepped out of the cab, and rounded toward the far side of the pumps, boots crunching on gravel. And there he was. Ranger lay just where Noah had said he would be, curled in the corner between a broken vending machine and a crumbling support post. The dog didn't rise, but he lifted his head, alert and watching, eyes scanning Lizzie as she approached. His body was still thin, ragged, coated in dust. The torn ear twitched once. He didn't growl, but he didn't wag his tail either. Lizzie knelt down slowly, cautious, resting her hands on her thighs. "So," she murmured, "you're the ghost my kid's been talking about." Ranger sniffed, his nostrils flaring slightly. He didn't move. Lizzie extended her hand, palm down, a few inches away, and stayed still. After a long moment, the dog inched forward, not a leap, not a bark, just a slow movement, as if every gesture had to be earned. He pressed his nose lightly against her fingers. It was the softest thing she'd felt in months. Noah watched from behind the truck door, wide-eyed. "Well," Lizzie said quietly, not turning, "he's not running." From that day forward, Ranger became a silent presence at the edge of their lives. Lizzie didn't bring him home, not yet, but she allowed Noah to visit every morning before work and every evening before sunset. She left food, fresh water, a tattered blanket from the back of the shop. Ranger never followed them, never tried to enter their world. He stayed always in the ghost shadow of that station, until the snake. It was 3 days later, a hot, still afternoon. Lizzie had left Noah in the back of the shop while she rotated tires for an old man named Carl Nunez, a retired bus driver with skin like worn leather and hands that trembled slightly from age. Carl, tall and reedy, with thick black glasses and a cowboy hat he never removed, was a fixture in Dustwell. Always polite, always paid in cash. Lizzie was tightening the last lug nut when she heard it, the sharp rising cry of her son, followed by the unmistakable rattle of something deadly. She dropped the wrench. Noah had wandered around the back of the property, chasing a lizard near a pile of old junked mufflers when he nearly stepped onto the rattlesnake. The reptile coiled, tail buzzing, tongue flicking, fangs gleaming in the slanting light. Noah froze in place, lips trembling, too afraid to cry out again. And then Ranger came. He moved like a whisper, soundless and precise, placing himself between the snake and the boy in a single bound. He didn't bark. He didn't snarl. He stood rigid, head low, eyes locked onto the threat. The snake recoiled, rattling louder now, coiling tighter, but it sensed what Ranger was, and that primal instinct made it retreat. Slowly, deliberately, it slithered back into the shadows beneath the metal pile. Ranger did not chase. He simply turned, nudged Noah with his nose, and sat beside him like a sentry. Lizzie found them like that. Her son pale but unharmed, the dog watchful and calm. Her heart thudded so hard she thought it would split open. That night, Ranger came home. She made him a bed in the corner of the garage beneath the pegboard of tools. Noah cleaned an old dog bowl, filled it with chicken from their leftover dinner, and sat beside Ranger until he fell asleep. Lizzie watched from the hallway, arms crossed, uncertain and silent. The next morning, Ranger didn't run. That same day, Lizzie received a call. Sheriff Jonah Briggs was a wide-shouldered man in his early 50s with thinning blonde hair and a voice like gravel in a tin can. He'd been sheriff of Dustwell for nearly 2 decades and had the sunburned skin and worn patience to prove it. Briggs was respected more out of consistency than warmth. He wasn't a man of small talk, but he cared deeply in ways he rarely expressed. "I heard from Cole," he said, stepping into the garage late afternoon, wiping his forehead beneath a worn tan Stetson. "The ex-cop looking for that dog. Says he's got reason to believe something's going on down here. K-9 units disappearing, ending up in the wrong hands." Lizzie set down her socket wrench. "Wrong hands how?" Briggs pulled out a small notebook, flipping to a marked page. "He says some of them are being taken off record, shipped through ghost towns. Sold to private handlers, some for fighting, some for security ops with zero oversight, all of it off the grid. Ranger may have been one of them." Lizzie leaned back against the workbench, jaw tightening. "And what? They let these dogs just vanish? Some are declared retired and never followed up on. Others just disappear in paperwork." "Cole said he used to work with dogs?" she asked. Briggs nodded. "K-9 trainer out of El Paso, resigned after a botched op down south. But he's been tracking this ring ever since. Thinks Dustwell might be a pass-through point." Lizzie didn't speak right away. She thought of the way Ranger stood between her son and that snake, the scar on his side, the way he flinched at the sound of trains, like someone who once knew duty and pain. "He's not going anywhere," she said firmly. Briggs studied her face. "I'm not here to take him. I just want you to know, this town's quiet, yeah, but the kind of people Cole's talking about, they use quiet places to hide ugly things." Lizzie nodded once. As the sheriff walked back to his cruiser, Ranger stood on the edge of the garage bay, watching him leave, his eyes narrowed but calm. Later that night, Noah slept curled against the dog's side, one small hand resting over Ranger's ribs. Lizzie sat at the table, thumbing through a folder Cole had left earlier. Inside were photocopies of reports, pictures of dogs, some recovered, some not. At the bottom was a name tag, RNG-21, K-9 unit. She closed the folder slowly. Ranger didn't stir, but his tail gave a single, slow wag. The dust storm arrived like a beast uncaged. The air turned thick with amber grit. The sun vanished behind a veil of wind and sand, and for nearly 2 hours, Dustwell disappeared into itself. Lizzie bolted the garage doors shut, sealed the windows, and kept Noah close. The storm howled like a memory, clawing at every crack in the walls. When it finally passed, it left behind silence, a silence so deep it hummed in the ears. Outside, Everything was coated in a film of powder-fine sand. Even the desert seemed stunned. Ranger had endured it in his quiet way, curled up beneath the workbench in the garage, unmoving, his eyes open through it all. That night, when the wind stilled and the stars returned, Lizzie decided he needed a proper cleaning. She filled a rusted metal tub behind the shop with warm water and dish soap. Noah helped carry buckets from the sink, sloshing water over his shoes with each step. Ranger followed them without resistance, sitting obediently beside the tub, patient as always. His eyes, now clearer than they'd ever been, watched Lizzie's every move. "All right, soldier," Lizzie muttered, sleeves rolled past her elbows. "Let's see what you're hiding under all that desert." Ranger didn't flinch as she began washing the dust from his coat, working through the thick, tangled fur. He only winced once when her fingers reached the back of his neck. Lizzie paused, frowning. "Noah, hand me the scissors." Beneath a dense mat of matted hair, Lizzie felt something rigid stitched, not grown. She clipped carefully, pulling the fur apart until the edge of fabric emerged. It was a collar, an old one made of sun-bleached khaki canvas, nearly indistinguishable from the surrounding grime. The lettering was faded but legible. RNG 21, K9 Unit, Texas Base. Lizzie stared at it for a long time, lips parted. Noah peered over her shoulder. "That's his name, right?" he asked. "Like a code?" Lizzie nodded slowly. "It's more than a name. It's proof." By noon the next day, Cole was back in Dustwell. He arrived in a dusty silver sedan, with government plates and eyes that hadn't seen much sleep. Lizzie had called him the moment she uncovered the collar, and now they stood behind the garage as she handed it to him. Cole turned the collar over in his hands like it was a relic from a life lost. His jaw clenched. "I trained him," he said quietly. Lizzie glanced at Ranger, who stood several feet away, tail motionless, ears forward. "We called him Ranger back then too," Cole continued. "RNG 21 was his formal ID. Best nose I'd ever seen on a shepherd. He was part of our narcotics unit out of the Texas border base. 2 years ago, during a raid on a cartel drop house outside Laredo, something went wrong. We were ambushed. 3 officers were injured. Ranger took a hit. We never found his body. They told me he'd died, or maybe been taken. But seeing him now..." He didn't finish the sentence. Lizzie watched him carefully. "And now? You planning to take him back?" Cole's mouth twisted. "He's not government property anymore. Technically, if he was declared dead, his records are archived. But if what I suspect is true, Ranger never died. He was taken and sold." "Sold?" she echoed. Cole nodded. "There's a black market for dogs like him. Retired K9s, war dogs, even dogs in training. They're sold to private security firms, cartels, underground fight rings. It's sick. They drug them, retrain them, break their instincts." Lizzie looked at Ranger again, who now sat next to Noah under the shade of a scrubby mesquite tree, head resting gently against the boy's leg. "He doesn't seem broken to me," she said. "No," Cole said, quieter now. "He's still in there. You can see it in how he protects your boy. But he remembers too. Dogs like Ranger never forget who hurt them, or who didn't come back." They stood in silence for a beat, the wind brushing sand over their boots. Cole handed the collar back to Lizzie. "He belongs with you now, but I'll be around. There's something deeper going on in this part of the state. More missing dogs, more movement along the back highways." Lizzie nodded. "Let me know if I can help." Cole managed a tired smile. "You already are." Later that night, Lizzie sat on the porch while Noah lay sprawled on a blanket inside, drawing pictures of Ranger. The air was cool for once, clean from the storm. Ranger sat at her feet, his body relaxed but watchful. She ran her fingers along the curve of his spine, pausing at the old scar beneath his ribcage. "You were meant to die," she whispered, "but you didn't." Ranger looked up at her, as if understanding every word. "You're home now?" she said. He leaned his head against her leg. The days that followed were calm, but it was the kind of calm that carried tension underneath, like the silence before a thunderstorm. Ranger no longer lingered in the shadows of Dustwell. He now walked the streets with purpose, his head held high and his eyes ever alert. Though he never strayed far from Noah's side, he had developed a habit of circling their house twice before settling down, as if retracing invisible lines of duty etched into his bones. Word had spread, not in the way of town gossip, but more like whispered stories passed between neighbors leaning on fences. Old Mrs. Keeley, who ran the post office and wore a different brooch for every day of the week, had called Ranger the Storm Dog after seeing him emerge from the sandstorm unharmed. The kids at the hardware store had started calling him Captain, and even Sheriff Briggs tipped his hat when he passed the garage. But Lizzie felt it in her gut. Something wasn't sitting right. She kept her eyes sharper, locked the shop earlier, checked the rear windows more often, and then came the night that would change everything. It started with wind. Dry, restless wind that stirred the red sand into twisting eddies along the roads. The sun had barely set, but the sky remained stained in rust-colored hues, and a strange stillness hung over the town. Lizzie stood in the kitchen, watching Noah set out Ranger's bowl near the back porch when her phone buzzed. A text from Cole. Surveillance picked up chatter. Someone's looking for RNG 21. Stay alert. She didn't respond, just locked the door and pulled the blinds down. At the edge of Dustwell, beyond the scrubland and dead yucca trees, stood the abandoned gas station where Ranger had once taken refuge. Though he now slept at Lizzie's, he still returned there during the day, circling it like an old soldier returning to his post. That night, around 1 a.m., Ranger rose from his spot on the porch with a low growl. Lizzie was already half awake, her senses frayed by worry and Cole's message. She sat up in bed and looked toward the window. The garage floodlight had flickered, then gone out. Noah stirred in the next room, murmuring in his sleep. Ranger was already at the door, his ears up, tail rigid. Lizzie grabbed a flashlight, her boots, and a rusted wrench from the tool shelf by the hall. "Stay inside," she whispered to the dog, but she knew better. Ranger slipped out silently ahead of her, moving into the darkness like smoke. Behind the old gas station, the air felt thick with dust and the scent of oil-soaked earth. A shadow moved near the edge of the awning, too tall and broad to be wildlife. Ranger's growl sliced through the silence, low and pulsing. The intruder froze. Lizzie, crouching behind an overturned bin, caught a glimpse-tall man, black hoodie, gloves. Not from around here. His movements were too calculated. He reached for something at his belt. Before she could shout, Ranger lunged. The attack was swift, but controlled. Ranger didn't go for the throat. He aimed for the arm, disarming the man and sending him tumbling into the dust. The flashlight clattered from Lizzie's hand as she rushed forward. The man scrambled up, bleeding from the wrist, and bolted into the night, disappearing into the ghost streets beyond the tracks. Lizzie sank to her knees beside Ranger, her breath catching in her throat. "You okay?" she asked, running trembling hands over his coat. Ranger nudged her chin, tail flicking once. A reassurance. The next morning, Dustwell buzzed with cautious curiosity. Sheriff Briggs arrived before dawn, standing beside the wreckage at the gas station with narrowed eyes and quiet fury. "Someone was watching him," he muttered, tracking the story. "Might have been trying to recover him or silence him." Noah sat quietly on the porch steps, Ranger resting against his side, unbothered by the minor scratches on his coat. Cole arrived shortly after, face grim. "We're too visible," he said. "We made noise, and now they're listening." Briggs nodded. "We'll increase patrols, check camera logs, keep folks close." "What if they come again?" Lizzie asked. "They will," Cole said flatly. "But next time, we'll be ready." That afternoon, Dustwell changed. A few of the townspeople like Grady, the mechanic who always wore socks with sandals, and Nadine from the diner with her sky-blue beehive hair showed up at the garage with tools, locks, spare cameras. "We look out for our own," Nadine said, holding out a basket of scones. Even the four-legged kind. Sheriff Briggs organized a town meeting at the library that evening. He didn't say much, but his message was clear. Dustwell would not be an easy target. The town may be small, but it had teeth and memory. That night, as the wind calmed and the red dust settled back into the earth, Ranger stood at the edge of the porch, staring into the dark. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him, Dustwell stood watch. The train whistles were different after that night. Dustwell had always been stitched together by the sound of the freight lines, long, low moans in the distance that carried over the sand like echoes of forgotten stories. But now, whenever the whistle blew, Lizzie felt something coil in her chest. Ranger would stiffen, ears twitching, and sometimes, just for a moment, she'd see the soldier in him flicker back to life. Cole had returned to town for longer this time, his car parked outside the sheriff's station and a cot set up in the back office. He was no longer just a wandering ex-cop with a hunch. He was now leading a multi-jurisdictional investigation alongside Sheriff Briggs, peeling back the layers of a quiet but lethal operation that stretched from border towns in Texas to forgotten stretches of Nevada, the new name for the case file, Unit Echo. Cole stood tall, wiry but sharp, his eyes constantly scanning rooms as if expecting to be ambushed by ghosts. He carried a canvas satchel stuffed with folders and memory cards, his jacket always dusty from the road. When he sat down to talk, his voice dropped into that low, clipped rhythm of someone who had spent too many years behind doors, where truth was a currency rarely spent. "This isn't just about Ranger," he told Lizzie one morning, over coffee at Nadine's diner. "They were taking dogs from the K-9 Academy and laundering them through private security contracts. The lucky ones ended up guarding warehouses. The others—" He didn't finish, just sipped his coffee, then slid a photo across the table. A grainy still frame of a black van, license plate blurred, parked near an industrial loading dock in El Paso. "Last seen transporting 3 dogs," he said. "One of them might have been from Ranger's original unit. If we find that van, we might find more." Lizzie studied the image. "Why Ranger, though? What makes him different?" Cole's jaw flexed. Some of these dogs were trained in a now-defunct tracking protocol sniff-based threat identification without handler prompts. It was experimental, expensive. Only a few ever mastered it. Ranger was one. She blinked. "So he's, what, a genius?" "Not genius, focused, loyal. He doesn't just follow orders, he makes decisions. That's why they want him. Not to protect, to hunt." Meanwhile, back in Dustwell, something remarkable had begun to unfold. Noah, with his toothy grin and oversized backpack, had become something of a local celebrity. It started with a visit to WZRD 98.4, the town's only radio station, where Miss Carol, the sprightly host in her 60s with purple glasses and an obsession with Elvis, had invited him for a Local Heroes segment. "Tell us, sweetheart," she said, as she leaned toward the mic, her bracelets jangling. "What made you bring a wounded dog back to life?" Noah looked nervous at first, his legs swinging beneath the chair, but then he smiled, eyes lighting up like the desert after rain. He wasn't scary like people thought, just tired, like he was waiting for someone. "And you became that someone?" "I guess. He saved me too." The clip went viral, at least by Dustwell standards, shared dozens of times, replayed at the diner, even printed in the town paper with a headline, "Boy and the Brave." Mrs. Keeley taped it to the post office window with pride. Ranger, of course, didn't know he'd become famous, but he did seem to sense the shift in energy around town. Strangers greeted him with nods. Kids left little toys by the garage gate. Even the mailman, who used to flinch, now gave him a half cookie with every delivery. But with light came shadow. That evening, as the sun slipped beneath the mesa and the train whistle moaned across the plain, Cole called Lizzie again. "We tracked the van," he said. "Abandoned near Tucumcari. The dogs are gone." He paused. "There was a note in the glove box. Coordinates. It's a meeting point. 3 nights from now." "Is it a trap?" she asked. "Probably," Cole said. "But we don't have a choice. They know Ranger's alive. They'll come again." She glanced toward the garage, where Ranger lay with his head on Noah's chest as the boy read aloud from a comic book. "He's not going anywhere," she said. "I wasn't asking him to," Cole replied. "I need him with us." 3 nights would come fast. In the meantime, Lizzie began reinforcing the garage again. Noah, unaware of the plan unfolding, continued drawing pictures of Ranger as a superhero, with a cape made from an old dish towel. Sheriff Briggs doubled patrols. Cole met with a contact from Albuquerque, Janine Ortiz, a sharp-eyed Latina in tactical boots who used to work canine narcotics. She was in her early 40s, broad-shouldered, with a tattoo of a hawk on her forearm and a habit of finishing people's sentences before they could. "She's blunt," Cole warned, "but she's good." Janine met Ranger without fanfare, simply knelt, let him sniff her palm, then nodded. "He's not broken," she said. "He's waiting for the right order." That night, they sat under the stars behind the garage. Lizzie, Cole, Janine, and Ranger. Noah was asleep inside. Cole mapped the coordinates on a wrinkled paper, circling a barren stretch outside Clovis, New Mexico. "We go quiet, just us. No sirens, no uniforms. They're expecting fear. We give them focus. Ranger, lying in the dirt, lifted his head. His ears twitched as the distant train passed again, and his eyes found the horizon. The desert didn't sleep. It only paused, like a beast holding its breath beneath the heat-cracked crust of the earth. On the day the operation was set to unfold, Dustwell's air was unusually still. Even the vultures circling above the rusted water tower seemed to move in cautious arcs, sensing the tension radiating from the old gas station just beyond the train tracks. The trap would be set at sundown. The old gas station, with its sun-peeled signs and shattered windows, had once been a place of abandonment, where Ranger lay broken and forgotten. Now it was wired, mapped, and crawling with a quiet line of shadows. The FBI had arrived at midnight the night before. No sirens, no fanfare. Just quiet boots, black SUVs, and a coordinated silence. Leading the team was Special Agent Darren Flint, a broad-chested man in his early 50s, with a square jaw and streaks of silver through his close-cut hair. Flint had once served in the Marine Corps before transferring into federal service. His voice had the grit of sandpaper and the weight of unflinching clarity. He trusted few and liked even fewer, but he respected dogs more than most men. When he met Ranger, he knelt down, not out of affection, but reverence. He didn't pet the dog. He simply held his gaze and said, "You remember how to finish it?" Ranger didn't flinch. His tail didn't move. He only blinked once. That was enough. Beside Flint was Tasha Lee, a tactical handler in her early 30s, sharp, fast-talking, dressed in desert camo and black gloves. She'd seen K-9 units deployed overseas, and had once pulled a wounded Belgian Malinois from a collapsed bunker in Kandahar. She looked at Ranger the way one veteran looks at another, without words. The plan was simple, on paper. Ranger would return to the station alone. The bait. A collar with a silent tracker. Cameras hidden in rusted pump handles. The team would remain out of sight in a perimeter ring, hidden beneath tarps, inside delivery trucks, and buried in the shadows. The leader of the dog laundering ring, an ex-military contractor named Jericho Vance, was expected to show. Vance was a former logistics sergeant with a dishonorable discharge and a face like burnt sandstone, pockmarked, thin-lipped, with a nose broken twice. He'd used his clearance to move animals under the radar, military-grade K-9s. He once boasted in a tapped phone call, worth more than gold if trained right. He was also dangerously intelligent. A man who didn't run operations himself, but tested them. As the sun dipped low and the sky turned a watercolor blend of pink and blood orange, Ranger walked alone toward the gas station, the soft crunch of sand beneath his paws, the only sound. The tracker nestled beneath his collar. Inside the garage, Cole sat crouched behind a barrel, radio silent. Lizzie had been ordered to stay at home with Noah, but she stood in her kitchen doorway, eyes fixed toward the distant outline of the station, heart pacing like a drumbeat. Then came the signal. A black SUV pulled in, its engine humming like a restrained beast. 3 men stepped out, lean, alert, and armed. The 4th emerged last. Jericho Vance in a tan field jacket, sunglasses even after dusk, and a smug gait that made Flint's blood simmer through his earpiece. Ranger stood near the entrance of the old garage, backlit by the sunset. The wind kicked up faint trails of dust behind him. "Well, look who they left behind," Vance muttered, stepping forward. Ranger didn't move. His stance wasn't aggressive yet, but it held weight, calculated, present. "Isn't he a good boy?" one of the men sneered, reaching toward a tranquilizer gun. Ranger's body tensed. His gaze never shifted. Then, in a blink, it happened. The moment the man's hand brushed the barrel, Ranger surged forward, not a wild charge, but a tactical arc. He ducked left, faked high, and sank his teeth into the man's forearm. The gun clattered to the ground. In that same breath, hidden floodlights cut through the darkness, and voices thundered, "Federal agents! Hands where we can see them!" Chaos ignited. 2 suspects ran. Tasha and her team took them down before they hit the second pump. Flint moved on Vance, tackling him just as he reached for a concealed holster. The scuffle was fast and brutal. Vance fought with the desperation of a man cornered by ghosts, but Flint overpowered him, twisting his arm until bone popped. The cuffs clicked shut. Meanwhile, Ranger had cornered the last man pinned beneath a crumbling tire rack, whimpering, with his arm bleeding and a look of disbelief on his face. "You said he was broken," the man gasped. Ranger didn't growl. He just stood watch, chest rising and falling, eyes locked forward like a sentinel carved from dusk. At sunrise, the town stirred slowly, unaware of the storm that had passed silently in the night. Sheriff Briggs met Lizzie at her porch, hat in hand. "It's over," he said. "Not for Ranger," she replied, smiling faintly as the dog approached from the dusty horizon, his coat streaked with dirt, but his eyes brighter than ever. Later that day, the FBI packed their gear and rolled out. Cole stayed behind. "I told you he wasn't done," he said to Lizzie. "No," she replied, bending down to press her forehead gently to Ranger's. "He was just waiting for his moment." The summer rolled in gently that year, like a blessing. Dustwell, a town long defined by wind, sand, and silence, seemed to pause and breathe again. The old gas station no longer looked like the carcass of something forgotten. A new coat of whitewash had softened its edges, the rusted signs replaced with hand-painted boards, and a weathered wooden plaque carved with two simple words, "Ranger's Rest." The transformation was quiet but deliberate. It wasn't flashy. There were no grand speeches, no red ribbons. Just a handful of locals and a few federal folks in plain shirts, standing in the morning sun as Lizzie turned the old key and opened the door to what was once abandonment, and now a haven. Inside, the scent of sawdust lingered. The back room had been converted into a sleeping area, lined with soft mats, water bowls, and worn blankets, each one embroidered with a small patch that read, "Not Forgotten." There were 3 dogs already lying in the shade by the far wall. One was missing a leg, another had cloudy eyes, the third flinched every time someone stepped too close. But Ranger didn't flinch. He walked between them with the calm assurance of a veteran returning home, not as a soldier, but as a guide. Noah stood nearby, clutching a blue folder with the Adopt a Hero dog logo on the front. His hair had grown longer since spring, curling slightly around his ears, and he wore the same patched denim overalls he insisted on every important day. Today, he was the youngest ambassador the program had ever chosen, a tall woman with gray-streaked hair and a sleek bun. Mrs. Evelyn Brandt, the state director for animal rehabilitation, stood beside him. She was sharp-featured, wore a navy blazer despite the heat, and had the calm, measured tone of someone who had spent a lifetime navigating bureaucracy with grace. "Your dog saved lives, Noah," she said, adjusting her glasses. "And so did you." Noah glanced at Ranger, who was lying at his feet with one paw resting over the other. "He saved me first." Mrs. Brandt smiled, softer now. "That's the part most people forget." Cole was there too, leaning against the porch railing, with a cup of coffee in one hand and a small bandage still wrapped around his wrist from the sting of the last operation. He was quieter these days, his edges a little softer. He hadn't said yet whether he'd leave town or stay, but he showed up to every construction day, brought extra lumber, and fixed the garage roof without being asked. "Place suits him," he murmured to Lizzie as he nodded toward Ranger. "So does the boy," she replied. Lizzie herself looked different now. She still wore oil-stained jeans and steel-toe boots, but her eyes had shed that guarded weariness. There was a lightness in the way she moved, a softness in her voice when she spoke to Noah, or when she gently brushed dirt from Ranger's back. She had once been a woman who trusted only machines. Now, she built a sanctuary for souls. As the sun climbed higher, Sheriff Briggs pulled up in his dusty cruiser, his round frame squeezed out of the driver's seat with a grunt, and he wiped his brow with a handkerchief printed with stars. "Figured I'd stop by before the ceremony," he said. Lizzie raised an eyebrow. "Ceremony?" Briggs chuckled. "You didn't hear? Ranger's getting a badge. Honorary retired K-9 officer for the state of New Mexico. Got the papers in my glove box." He winked. "Don't worry, no taxes." The ceremony itself was modest, held under the shade of the cottonwood tree near the old train tracks. There was a podium borrowed from the school, a small speaker system playing a recording of the national anthem, and a folding chair crowd that included farmers, store owners, and even grumpy old Mr. Talcott, who never liked dogs, but brought a jar of treats anyway. Noah stood beside Ranger as the badge was pinned to a thick brown leather collar made custom by a veterans group in Santa Fe. The collar was stamped with the inscription, "Ranger, Valor Beyond Orders." A quiet applause rose as the badge caught the sunlight. Later that afternoon, when the last of the visitors had gone, and only the wind remained to keep them company, Ranger walked slowly to the tree, where it all began, just a few steps from where Noah had first found him, curled beneath the broken awning. Noah followed, dropping to sit in the grass beside him. The boy leaned back against the trunk. Ranger lay beside him, chin resting on Noah's knee. The train tracks stretched before them, empty and endless. Silver lines carrying the heat of the day and the echoes of what had come before. "Do you think," Noah whispered, "he remembers the ones he lost?" Lizzie stood a few paces behind, arms crossed gently. "I think he carries them, but I also think he's made new ones." The wind stirred the leaves. A freight whistle called far in the distance. Ranger didn't flinch. His eyes stayed open, but softer now. No longer searching, no longer waiting. Just home. In the quiet corners of the world, where no one is watching, miracles still unfold. Not always with thunder or light, but with a soft paw, a child's heart, and the quiet plan of something greater. Ranger was more than a dog. He was a reminder that even the most forgotten among us can be chosen for something sacred. Perhaps God sends his angels not with wings, but with fur, scars, and eyes that have seen too much and still choose to love. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Leave a comment below, tell us your thoughts, or simply write one word. Amen. If you too believe that love can heal what the world has left behind, subscribe for more stories like this, and may God bless you and your family with quiet miracles in your everyday life.